Yay.
I was going to volunteer my environment, but Zoom is eating all my CPU, and I tried to embed GraphQL in it as a part of the playground, and it's completely broken. So,
As GraphQL and Express does it.
well, and I tried to go really simple. I don't know if you've looked at it's pronounced too cool, but it's TUQL,
No, I
and
haven't
it's
looked.
like a single node module that turns an SQLite database into a GraphQL server. Really, really simple one, right? No features basically, but it's good enough to tool around with React. So I'm going to keep trying to work on that in the background so that we can get to Apollo and React at some point in the future.
Yeah, it's Apollo is better than Relay. I like.
Yes, yeah, much
I've
better.
always used Apollo, and for whatever reason, we used Relay in this one. I think I can't remember why. I know up at Sunray they're using Apollo client as well, but Apollo seems to be the better built. And it used to have Redux built right into it, and then they took it out.
Yeah.
I don't know what. I don't know if they have anything special in their caching or not. If they do that,
There's a bunch of cache control stuff in there, which you can just turn off for the sake of hello world kind of stuff.
yeah. But it was. But they had like a. I don't know if Relay has caching built into it or not. I don't think it does.
No, I think that's one of the reasons why people used to bring Redux and stuff like that.
Well, we always from day one stayed away from Relay. Like anything.
Yeah.
I find it's funny how React was built by Facebook and it's really good, but it seemed to be everything else that Facebook touched was just a mess. Like even Yarn, it's back and forth on whether Yarn is, but it sends all your metadata to Facebook. So I'm not really keen on.
Yeah.
I don't know if that really makes a huge difference, but I'm just not keen on. Now I'm not sure what Node does. I'm sure that they steal our data somehow. Just don't tell us.
Node Core is pretty good, but yeah, there's some modules that have sneaky stuff in them.
Yeah, but I think that's like anything Node related. If you're not paying attention closely, something can slip into your project. Oh, maybe I'll while Rick is doing his thing, I'll just share some for Sebastian since he doesn't know. Just hold on for a second here.
Anyone know what the exit status, like when I try to install Node or like use Node version 15.14, it's saying that exit status 5 access is denied. Do you guys know what's up with that?
That's new. I don't think I've always see exit status 1. But I'm going to share my screen until Rick is. So, Sebastian, part of what's in that base project is React Material. So, Rick knows more about design languages than any of us. So, Material is Google's design language.
Okay.
And I think I'm saying that right. And
Mhm.
You'll hear people say they use Bootstrap, which is another one.
Yeah. Oh, so it's just like a CSS framework? Is that what Material is then?
Oh, well, this is much more. This is why we use this. So this is an actual, they built a whole component library. One of the things with Bootstrap is, at least in the old days, now maybe today it's different, but they never had a complete library. You always had to go out and get multiple things.
Yeah.
And so now this is a well-written library. Even if you didn't use, like you could totally rewrite the styling in it. You could totally redo it and use it with different themes or different, and you don't have to use the Google design language or Material, but it is pretty nice. And a lot of things are built this way. So it's one of the reasons we use it is it comes like it's pretty complete and you don't really have to do a lot of styling other than spacing and positioning, those types of things.
Yeah.
And if you're following good design principles, you can set all your colors, your primary and secondary colors on everything up front. And you can override them really easily like you would with CSS. It uses JavaScript CSS. So, which is slightly different. Really what it is instead of having dashes, it has like,
Like the curly braces or?
well, no, it just, everything is camel case.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So like, it's, oh, I don't see anything. Anyways, this is the actual library. It has all the components in it and you can look through them fairly easily. And it provides like recipes of how to do things. So Rick was already experimenting. So you can easily just, let me see. So there's the recipe there for this above.
Oh, okay, cool.
So you can actually just, and Rick did it, he copied and pasted, although it didn't have the right, looks like they've switched over the imports. So now it's using the right imports for the particular project you're on. So you can now just copy that in. So, I mean, there's tons and tons of stuff in here for recipes. Anything you can think of, it has and has built. It's
Yep.
way easier to see. Bootstrap was more of a CSS library, and then they turned it into like components.
Yeah.
And they sort of did a mix and match. Now, I haven't looked lately to see if there are any good libraries. I use this one in my project, and it just works. Like
Yeah.
it just has everything.
Well, the naming of stuff, just the few things I've seen here seems to be a lot better than Bootstrap. I know that was one of the things I didn't like about it was the really random, confusing naming.
Yeah, so and essentially everything combines in one way or another. And so you can do a million things with it. There's more, it's super powerful. So, and like I said, so the whole project is meant to work. Like you don't use divs or spans or anything. You just simply, now I see in places where they do use div, although this one is showing examples that doesn't have divs and spans in it. So they must have completely bought into the library. So it has like the component part where it will show you examples and recipes, but then at the bottom, you can actually go to the API part. So this explains all the properties that, so when we say like those props I was showing earlier, so these are all the different things. And there is some CSS styling, like this variant. It's all run by CSS, which you can override. So you could override all these tags and change them to what you wanted. So whenever you went for an H1 variant, it would now be your variant instead of the default variant. So there is CSS, but it's not in a CSS file. Like you can make a normal project with a SAS file. Like I could actually have set this project up and every component could have a SAS file. The one thing about doing everything this way and with JavaScript styling is you can do server-side components better because everything's, that was one of the things I was reading about, I think the server-side stuff where you create everything server-side and then send it across, is they do it all in JavaScript anyways. So, but all it does is transpile down into a normal, like when it builds, it transpiles down. I think the way they used to do the old server-side stuff is they turn it into a giant string and just send it across as one solid web page.
Yeah.
And I'm not as up to date on the whole server-side stuff. I did build a couple and they look weird when you're, like when you hit refresh, everything is weird. And I think the whole reason why you do single page, the way we're doing it, is so you can do things like chat bots and stuff like that, like anything where you have to communicate back and forth. But if you're doing like just simple forms and stuff, I think you could just go with the server-side app. Rory might be know better than I about those things.
Yeah, no, that sounds right.
Yeah, because everything I've seen about server side, it simply just turns it into a giant string and then sends it to the web browser. So there's not a lot. It's not interacting really.
Mhm.
Anyways, so this is the library. Like I said, there's different ways. And look, I haven't seen these before. They now have mobile date pickers in them. I didn't see that before. So this new library has a lot of cool stuff in it. So they must be building more and more mobile into it. It's a big community. And I think that's one of the reasons why this does so well. You know, and they're constantly working on, like, they do have some pay stuff in here. Their grid is a really nice grid, and you get a base option you can use. Let me see, do they have that customized? I don't see it here. We used to have something called Lab, might be under systems or something. You know, more to look at. It's definitely growing bigger. Oh, I see. They realigned some of this stuff into different. Anyways, oh, there's the styling. They changed the styling in this one too. That's the legacy styling. Oh, that's there's another module they added to change out styling. That's the only thing I haven't looked at on these new ones. So I'm not sure when I upgrade if it's going to be backwards compatible with what I have. Anyways, that's the fun of front end libraries. They're always changing them. How did you make out, Rick?
My page is up and running.
All right. Do you want to share?
Depends what you need me to do.
Well, you're going to write code.
Oh boy. Yep. Hold on.
So we'll just do some simple things with state.
Okay. So just 1 second here. Get up to.
So we had done routes last week, Rick.
Okay.
I had Sheree create a small component, put it on a new route. And then she wired a button up, and then you can use React Router. They have something called history in there, and you could actually push to a new URL. So that's what the last video is about. It's essentially she had made a new page, new React component. We put it on a route, and then we wired the button up to it to actually switch from one page to another.
Okay. I don't have any of that from last week, of course. So
No, that's fine.
we'll
We
go a
can
different
just
tack.
focus on state.
Okay.
So if you
So-
want to share your IDE with us, we can walk you through some of that.
I do. And it always strikes me as odd that I can't just share my screen in Zoom.
It is a fun thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Because I would like to, start by sharing the project that I have up. Hold on 1 second. It like even numbers my screens in case like you want to share screen 1 or screen 2, but then they're just not anywhere there. So here, we'll do this for a second. So for those following along at home, I'm in the Civic Tech Fredericton, and what's happened is I've cloned the starter project and got that up and running. So the starter project, once it's up and running, is a 1 button that says my page. So that's it. And now we'll have to stop and share my visual code because to show that I'm up to date here. Which is somewhere here. I don't see it on my list of things. I don't see it on my list of things to share. This is terrible. Hold on. I have a lot of windows open.
A lot.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling through the list of screens that I can share, and it's not on that list. I'm not sure why that is. Let me stop it and start again. Nope. For some reason, Visual Studio is not showing up as an option in my things to share.
All right.
Oh, wait. That's because it's just called Code. It's not called Visual. It's not the name of the app at all.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay.
Hey, I was looking for the name. I was looking in the taskbar. It's Visual Studio Code, but in Zoom, it's just called Code. So
Oh,
here
you've
we
got
are.
3 times 50 in your height. It doesn't do. You can do your math outside of and then pass it in if that's what you wanted.
Oh yeah, I see. It's funny because I thought I had just reset my local application, so I don't know why. I don't know why it's that.
All right. So if you see where the handle click is, that's that history.push I talked about. So you can actually put a route name, like the relative route in there. And then when you hit the button click, because that is wired up to the button, it will actually push it to whatever route. Now we don't have another route built for you. So that's not going to work.
Okay.
We have to make a new component. And I don't want to kind of get into that tonight because we did it in the last one. So I think what we're going to do with that handle click is let's comment out the history.push because we're not going to do that. And I wrote the word route in. That's not actually, it would have been like /home or something like that.
Okay.
Whatever we put on in app for the /route, that's what would have been in there. So if you make a new component and assemble it, like watch the video and then it'll show you how to like assemble something. So for now, what I think we'll do is, okay, so if we go up to the imports where it says React, so right after the capital React, what's being imported, put a comma and then put curly braces, and inside that put use state. And it's actually showing you capital, yeah, there you go. So capital S. So this is state. State used to be an object that you put at the top of every class or whatever it was. This is way simpler. And what happens is we can use state in multiple ways. You can make a giant object and put it inside of, just have one state inside your component,
Okay.
or you can have multiple use states. I use multiple depending on what I'm doing, and sometimes, so each thing might represent one variable, or I might use an object with multiple keys. If I'm updating, like instead of triggering state multiple times in a row, I'll just make an object with keys and just update the object and then pass that to state once. And that way I only trigger state once. When I trigger state, when state is triggered, it causes a reevaluation. Now, the wonderful thing about the React DOM is it can sort of figure out when you have multiple state changes going at once, what's the right thing to do. Now that still slows it down a little bit, but not really that much. So it isn't until you get into something like building a data grid that things get hairy. So there will be a lot of talk in React about, like you could do this more efficiently or you could do that more efficiently. On a fairly benign component, it does not matter. It is only when you load a lot of elements onto the screen that you really have to get into optimization. That's when you do it. So I don't put memo on anything. I do not, memo is a way of, so memo evaluates, if you put it on a function, it'll evaluate the things you're handing into the function. And it will say, oh, nothing has changed. So I am not going to bother running this function. I'm just going to use the copy I have. And that gives you efficiencies. I don't do that until I actually get into something like a data grid. Once I got a lot of elements on the screen and there's a lot going on, then I start looking at my performance. There's an actual performance evaluation in your tools, in your Chrome Dev Tools, probably in Firefox. Apparently Firefox tools are now a lot better than they used to be. So it might actually be better to use if you like Firefox than Chrome. But until you have a problem, there's no point in like, in fact, memo and things like that have callbacks in them so they can actually slow things down. So I actually built something where I had a lot of stuff with memo on it and you could see it almost crawling to a halt. And the second I took memo off, it just worked better. So really what you use it for is if you have a lot of complex if you had a lot of for loops and you don't want to run those for loops over and over and over again because the data hasn't changed, memo is a great way to stop that. So there is performance tools. Having like inline functions in the JSX can cause performance issues. So you try to avoid that. So like if I'm loading a selection box and I know what the selection box is, I'll use something like a use effect, load it once and it never loads again. So I don't have things constantly redoing stuff all the time over and over again. That's a slight conversation on performance. We're not going to talk about it that much or the rest of it. Use state to get back, to swing back. You can have multiple state changes happen back to back on a simple component. Nothing really bad is going to happen. React takes care of a lot of that stuff for you. It even does weird things like if you have like a bunch of cascading changes that could turn into an infinite loop, it can catch those and stop them. We don't see the errors, but we caught a bad problem one time in our UI and it wasn't coming up as a warning as an error. And then it finally just broke out. And there was something going on where there was a ton of state changes happening and they were all just colliding with one another and React was taking care of it. And then we added one more thing and it just broke. So there's a lot going on under the covers that it takes a long while to understand that. Console.log statements are great for like figuring out if you have like a lot of weird state changes and stuff going on. You can see it. It'll go like 8, 9, 10 times, you know, and you'll be like, but it doesn't look like it's slowing down. Why is this rendering over and over again? So anyways, just to get back to like, so if we're going to put a state change in, if we're going to cause something to change, so let's do a simple, let's just do a simple adding, something that's adding. So
what if we like put a button in that changed the text on the, like a check mark that changed the name of the button? Is that sort of what you're thinking or something different?
well, you can actually change the name of the text on the button if you want. So what we could do for starters, yeah, let's try that. So first you have to declare your use state. So right below history, yeah, bring that use state down with you. So we go const, and then it's array brackets. Now it seems weird, but it's a new thing, equals use state. And then put your function brackets behind it. Now you can initialize that in the function brackets with anything you want. You can put anything in there you want, or you can just start with null. It doesn't matter. Okay. So sometimes I'll initialize that with an object or an array, just even an empty array or an empty object, just to have something in there, depending on what's going on further down in my code. I usually leave it, most times I leave it null, because the first time states gets, like, I have a lot of places where I check see if the state is null, because that indicates that nothing has happened yet. And so it's like, if this is null, don't do anything.
Then you're fresh.
Right.
Okay.
And so null is usually in JavaScript a great way. We use null or undefined for different things. I use null a lot when I'm starting out anything, because it says essentially the state is fresh. And then if I know after that it can't get back to null, then I know every time I'm doing something, it's doing something. So let's, inside the use state, declare a variable in the first bracket, not inside the function brackets, inside the array brackets. So you're going to declare your variable name. It usually starts with a small letter, although you can use capital if you want, but that's the way I pretty much see everybody do it. So whatever the variable you want to call it, if you want to call it, I'd stay away from things like text, because they're like, sooner or later you'll import something that says text and it'll just stop working. So stay away from keywords. Whatever you want to call it, whatever it's going to hold, if it's going to hold a word or whatever.
For now, we'll go super simple. We'll call it my value.
Okay, put a comma. Now, so this is how hooks works. So in the case of use state, it has two variables or two things. One is a variable, the other is a function. And that is going to set the state of my variable. So we usually go set my variable is usually what I call the setters, because it's a setter.
So literally set my value.
Yeah. Now you could have called it anything, but
yep.
So with the way, so when you build a custom hook, like when it says use in front of it, that's a hook. And so when you use state, it has two things it has. You could have actually removed the setter and only had the variable in there and just left it blank with the comma, and it would still be fine. So like I have custom hooks I built that have 4 things in it. First thing, so for my get hook, like my get fetch, my first one before the comma is data. Second one is response code. The third one is the function that will call, actually make the call to the back end, get. And the fourth one is like error messages from the back end. So if I'm only using the getter, like to get something, I'll have like blank, comma, the function name, blank, comma, or comma blank. And so it allows me to do that. That's what a hook allows you to do. That's how they set it up. So in the use state one, we have a setter and we have the variable name. So now we got to put the setter somewhere. So let's put the setter inside put the setter inside of the handle click, because your button's still wired up to it.
Inside of here?
Yeah, because that's your function.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're telling me if I try to define set my value in here, it'll work because the scope of it is going to be on the click?
Yeah. See, on click, so that's the function for on click. Now I can pass stuff in through the function brackets as well. So that's the way you pass things in if you were going to pass in a variable. For now, we're not going to worry about that too much, but we'll do. So you're going to put function brackets behind that.
Yep.
Now how would we, so we've got text down on there that says my page.
So the way I would think about it is like my value is maybe a Boolean, and every time you click the button, it just flips it, and then it changes the text of the button back and forth.
Yeah, you could do that. You could make it a true false. Yeah, we could do that. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do a true false. So start it out with false up in the use state.
False up in the use state up here.
Yeah, right. Yeah, just put false in there. Okay, now down in the set my value, take the my value, put it in there, and just put a not in front of it.
Okay.
Which is the exclamation mark. There you go. So now that'll flip the variable every single time. Okay, so if we take the my value and go down where it says my page. Now what we're going to do is enclose first of all, put my page in double quotes and then close it in curly braces before we do anything.
My page. You lost me. Where's that?
So down on the button, it says my page.
Oh,
So
okay.
whatever text, so we're gonna have two choices here, right?
Yep.
So put that in quotes and then put curly braces around it. So there's a couple of different ways we could do this. I'm gonna do it this way. So now put my value before my page. Inside the no, it has to go inside the brackets. Everything has to go inside the curly braces because we're writing a function inside the JSX. So when we do that, we need, this essentially takes us out of the JSX. It's like having script tags, I think in the old days for JavaScript. It's kind of like that, where you can now write some JavaScript in here. So space, question mark, space, and then put semicolon after the, put a colon, sorry. Yeah, and then put some text there, the alternate text.
Sure. So therefore this is an if statement. If my value is true, the text is gonna be my page. And if it's false, it's gonna change to clicked.
Yeah. So save that and then let's see it run.
Okay, there we go. This is part of the problem with the GitHub. I'm gonna overwrite the content of your file with your changes. I'm gonna try that and see what happens. This is the card from before, so ignore that.
I can't see your, you have to stop sharing and then share again.
Okay, hold on.
You gotta love this.
This is a very strange thing that it does.
Zoom is genuinely odd for this.
I feel like I'm missing something because when I hit share screen, there's like a big number 1 and number 2 shows up. It's like it wants me to be able to share my screen, but okay. So there is the card, which you'll remember we were sort of playing with last month. This is just another component I threw on the page. We didn't really touch that, but this is the button clicked. So for some reason it says the word clicked.
Because it's false.
False. That's right. So we should set it to maybe true. There you go. So now it's changing back and forth when I click it.
So that's just a state change. So that's what I was talking about. When you click it, the state happens like that. It reevaluates the component. It runs all the way down the bottom. It looks at that if statement and goes, oh, I'm going to change my text. Now, why don't we try and change the color on the back on that card you have there? So why don't we in card, see where you have min width.
Oh, what I see. The very first thing we're doing, sorry, the handling click is happening first. So the very
Right.
first thing that happens is we set it to false because originally when the page is run, it's not clicked.
Right.
So how come when it loaded up, it was clicked? The text was clicked. That seems backwards to me unless I'm
Because it
crazy.
was false, and false is the outside condition, right? So my value. So what happens is the state gets evaluated when it's loaded, initialized, it
Mhm.
initializes as false.
Yep.
So when you hit save, it reloaded the component, even though you didn't see anything happen, it reloaded. And the second it remounted itself, it starts out in its initial state. Its initial state is false.
Yep.
So when it went down here, what's on the right is false. What's on the left is true.
Well, there's how long it's been since I've done some JavaScript because that's backward. That was opposite in my brain. So, okay.
Well, that's a new thing. Now, the other way I could have done that was I could have had value and two and signs, two ampersand signs, and my page. And then I could add another one below it that's value, not value, and clicked. And so it would actually flip both of them. It would shut one off and turn the other one on. You'd never see it happen. It would just be like that.
Right, or I could write it out
Actually done that
longhand.
back to-
I could write it out longhand. If my value equals true, then I could do it that way.
Actually,
too.
here, let's do another experiment. So
Sure.
put curly braces around the card. So put a curly brace at the beginning of the word card, like above that tag. Start a curly brace above it and a curly brace below the card. We're gonna do a little experiment here.
That was fun. Curly brace. I don't want that curly brace. I want it
Now, put it down here. Yeah. Now, take my value and just, yeah, leave it there, but also put it up there. And just put an and, put double ampersands. There you go. Now save that. Now go back and try it. What do you think is going to happen?
when I click the
You have
button,
to show
the
everybody
card-
else.
the card's going to appear and disappear. Well, I'm going to make sure it does what I think it's going to do before I share everybody. Yeah. that's
So I
true.
constantly do this. It's not great because it doesn't transition. It doesn't have a nice smooth transition, but this is one of the little tricks we do.
Right.
so
So we've
this is
essentially
the-
tied the state of that variable to the visibility of the card as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not nice and smooth like you would like in a web page, but it is a convenient way to hide things. So a lot of times when I'm loading a page, if I want to hide a bunch of elements, that's what I do. So I might start off, it might be, so the classic is I have a create edit modal. And what happens is there's a bunch of buttons when I create that I don't want to show up on the modal when it's in edit mode. So I just put an and beside the button with whatever property it is that a lot of times I tie it to if there's an ID. So if there's no ID, show me the button. If there is an ID, hide the button. But you don't see it because everything happens so fast and I'm not toggling. So it's not like, it's simply just the state of a condition I want when I know something is going to happen a certain way.
Okay.
So I'll use that. I'm sure there's new, cleverer ways, but this is an old school, it works every time type deal. So you can do and you can actually do things like map over a variable between those function brackets. So I can actually render a list by using an array with the word map and then return each element with its with like say a typography with the word in it, and it will just do that. It'll render over the whole thing and generate the whole list just like that. You won't see it happening, but so you can do lots of operations inside the JSX, which is pretty cool. So let's go up. Let's go back to your thing again there. So we're going to use something. We're going to use I'm going to have another. So what I'm going to do is we'll go back up to where we got state on React, and we're going to import a use. So put a comma after use state, and then go use effect. So the use effect is like a listener. And this is how you can chain events to happen the way you want them to do. So let's go down to just under our use state we have now. And copy and paste another use state in there. I want to do color. So right where you have where you created my value, just
Here.
copy and paste that and bring it down, and let's make another variable. So I want something with color. And let's so my color if you want, or whatever you want to call it.
That's seems to keep it pretty simple. Sure.
And then we need a setter. And then let's put the color red as our default start. Only put it in quotes. Let's go simple for now. Okay, then what I want to do is, so you declare the use effect. I usually declare them, I declare it just below the state changes. I don't think it matters, but I kind of like to do it that way. So just start with use effect underneath it, between the function and the last state you created. So just write the word use effect.
In here.
Yep. Now put the function brackets on the other end. Now what you're going to do is create another, like an anonymous function inside. So you're just going to do function brackets, space, lambda. Lambda's the arrow, like the equals arrow. And then you're going to do curly braces. So that's an anonymous function in JavaScript. Inside of the curly braces of there, yeah, we're going to do, oh, okay. So right now, the way that's set up, that'll run every time there's a state change. You don't want that. That's bad. So unless you know what you're doing.
So can you explain why you know that?
Because that mimics something called receives props. So will receive props in the old React was something that ran every time there was a state change, and you could actually compare the previous properties to the new properties that came in, and then say, oh, if they've changed, do something. Everyone got that wrong. I haven't seen anyone, there are very few people that actually know how to use it without making an infinite loop. It's the best way to make an infinite loop. If you're gonna do it, it's very hard to make an infinite loop in React. This is the easiest way to do that. So there's a couple other ways, but we won't get you into that. So if you go right between the bottom function bracket and curly brace and put a comma.
Here.
And then put empty array. Now that means it'll run every time on a init. So every time the component mounts, this will only run once. That's it. Every use function runs once. Every single time it runs once. And that's on an init. You can't stop that. So all you can do is put an if statement inside it to make sure, to check, to see whatever's happening doesn't happen until things are loaded or whatever. So we use init. Essentially I'll put functions in there to make calls to the back end to load data. So I'll usually just do that, and it'll be like fetch some data. And so when this component mounts, it automatically goes and gets its data and then comes back. And then I would have another use effect that watches the data. And when the data comes back, it then does something. So that's how I chain things. This is how we chain. What we're going to do is put my variable in there inside the brackets. So it's going to watch my value.
Okay.
So just type in my value. So it's going to watch that state change. So now every time that state change, now the one thing we know is that when it starts on false. And I don't want it to do anything when it starts on false. What I want it to do is change. No, that's not good. You can't do that. No, it's fine. Never mind. We're going to leave it the way it is.
Okay.
Never mind. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put set my color in there.
Yep.
And this isn't going to work well. It's only going to happen once. Oh, well, that's enough for stuff to happen. Yeah, but it's going to start off on yellow. That's the only thing is, oh, wait a second.
Explain it out loud. So
No, this is better as a counter. This is better as a counter because right now that's not gonna work that way.
Well, I mean, so in my brain, what I'm thinking is the way that it's going to happen is, we've got it coded here to be red, but the use effect's going to trigger once, and then whatever we actually wire up is going to spit out as yellow anyway. Is that what's going to happen?
Yeah, let's put an if around that. Just put the if around it if it's false. So it'll only turn once when you click the button, but we'll do it that way for now. It's kind of a bad example. It's not bad, but it's like a one time. So if we put an if statement around it, we go if my value. So we know it starts as false. So that's going to keep it from turning yellow. And then there you go. And then just put the curly. I think you can do that I always put curly braces around it, but you can simply do it like that.
A little bit easier to read anyway.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, if statements will run with just one. So now what that should do is only turn it yellow once. Now we need to go down to let's put it on the button. Just put color on the button, probably background color. And put the variable in there.
Is that, no, that's not right, is it?
Yeah, you have my color up above. Yep, that's the right one.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so save that and let's go back and look at it.
It turned yellow.
We
Now it's
can't see it.
Oh yeah, that's right. This is the fun part. Hi, Sandy.
Hi, Sandy.
Hey guys, Rory, I'm going
Hello.
to, maybe I can't. Are you okay, you're recording. I'm sorry. I won't stick around.
No. So hit refresh, just hit refresh. I know what we could have done to make it change color now.
This is the default state here now.
So so when you click it, it should turn yellow, right?
It turns to my page, yellow, and the thing shows up. Yep.
Yeah. But if you
Now,
click it again,
That's
now
right.
the reason it's not turning back is because of the if statement. It will turn back and forth if it's a different value. So if you had to put true in there twice, so use effects are great because they don't do things unless they get new information. So a lot of times I'll put a time date stamp if I'm trying to trigger something to happen over and over again, because that's the best way to like make sure it triggers every single time, is to give it like a random number. So if I have it hooked to a button, sometimes I'll do it that way. Sometimes I'll have it watch data come in. Sometimes it's just the cascading chaining of effects that I want to happen in a certain way.
Okay.
So it depends on what you want to do with it. Now we could have put a similar statement in there and started it off as red and then had like the true false change between red and yellow. And so when you clicked it every time, it should change. Let's go back and do that. Let's try that again.
What's the difference there between just handling the on click the way I'm setting the value versus adding the effect and putting all that stuff in? I guess
Well,
I'm a
use
little
effects
lost in the differences.
to show you how you can chain something. This is a real simple chaining event thing. So when I click something, it turned it to true and it did this, but now it also turned this a different color.
Oh, okay. So the
Could have just,
button doesn't have to be aware of all the other stuff that's happening. The code just needs to know when my value changes, do these things, and
Yeah.
the button click is the interaction element that changes the value, and when the value changes, the use event is the thing that's adding extra listeners to that. So it's removing, it's putting the code on the model, which is my value changing, and not everything needing to be tied to the click of the button.
right. And
Okay.
so, and that's exactly how React works, is the user does something, triggers a state change. The state change causes everything else. So that use effect won't work with a variable. It only works with something that has a changing of a state. A state has to have been triggered to change that, so it can evaluate it.
Yeah.
So we used to use different, I see a lot of people will set a variable at the top of the screen. Now that variable will get reevaluated every time, but it won't trigger necessarily a use effect change. So state always will, state triggers something in it and everything gets reevaluated. And that use effect gets evaluated with the state change because it's happening inside. So I could have put, I think you could put the state below it and it still would trigger that use effect. You probably get a warning that says the variable's been declared below the use effect. But essentially it's the state change that is requiring from home down to be reevaluated. And the use effect responds to that.
So this use effect here, because I passed in my value, the only thing that this use effect function is listening to is a change on my value. Is that right? So
Yep.
if I wanted it to listen to a bunch of other things, do I just, build that array with the other values I'd like it to listen to as well?
Yeah. Or
Okay.
you could build a bunch of use effects. And then when something changes in one use effect, the other use effect is listening to it. So it does something and then another one and so on. Depending on what you're trying to do.
That's why this works really well for data loading, right?
Yeah. And you could also listen to 2 or 3 things. Sorry, I'm wrong. You can use, as long as a state change occurs, the use effects gets evaluated. Because one of the things I do is take a parameter out of the URL and have the use effect watch that. So one of the things I do on my navigation is when I flip between single instances of something, as the ID changes in the router, it passes it down into the new component. And my use effect is watching that explicitly. So it says, oh, I've got a new parameter, I've got a new ID, go get me the data using this ID. And so that's how I load. Sometimes I'll load things, is I'll have a use effect listening. And then when it comes back, I have another use effect listening to so there's a state change happens when my data comes back, where it gets loaded into a body. And then when that happens, so it takes it out of the request, I use a state change to put it into a body variable. And then the use effect is listening to that. It takes the data out of it, manipulates it the way I want it, and put it in another state. And then I always have it, after I've remanufactured the data the way I want it, I have it sitting in that state locally all the time. So I can use it for whatever I want. So that's typically, or the other pattern I have is with the spinners. So I have one that's processing all the use effect, that's essentially processing the data. But the request response before that was listening, and it was saying, oh, your data hasn't come back yet. So it runs the spinner. And then when the data arrives, it starts processing and the spinner shuts off. Both use effects are listening to different things at the same time. And then lots of times, like if I do an update or something, I have a use effect that's like listening to the response code. And when it comes back, it says, oh, you successfully, I give a message to the user, it's successfully updated. And then I might reload the screen because new data has arrived. So a lot of times in my use effect, I have listening for between a 200 and 300 response code. And then it goes in and goes, oh, okay, you came back successfully. Go reload the data for this page, and then close the modal then message the user to successfully returned. Then go in, and this is all in one use effect. Then redirect the page back to where it's supposed to be. So that's all based on the response code coming back, and it's 200. On an error, it resets and holds the page in place. So that use effect is really powerful. You can do a lot of things. Use state, use effect, they do a lot of stuff. On some pages, I only have state changes. Some pages I have no use effects because I have nothing going on. There's no real need, like you said, even though we did it as an example, the fact is that if I was going to change the color on something, I'd probably just, I don't necessarily need a use effect to do that. Unless there's something specific I want to happen because this happened.
Right, and unless, so I could see now where there were, yeah, like you were saying, you might want to change the color of a button because you're waiting for the state of data to happen. The data ends up to be invalid, so you change the color of the button to red because of a state from a API request or something.
I use a thing called useFormic for my forms. And useFormic is a hook, but it does all, it manages all of your form, like whether it's dirty, when you're submitting. So it has something called is submitting. And lots of times I have is submitting in a use effect. So when something is submitting, I might do a bunch of things, or I might send out the spinner, or there might be a bunch of things I want to lock down, and the use effect controls all of that. So I can either do put the is submitting directly on the disable buttons, or I could have a disabled state, and then I could use the use effect to watch is submitting, and the second it goes to true, then I set everything to disable, and it sets the whole form disabled.
And the use effect, is that part of plain Jane React, or is it part of something else?
No, that's the custom hooks that come with React. So the use hooks, so that's why, like up by React, there's like a use memo, use ref. So use ref is like same as a normal ref in the sense that you could grab a button. You could use it to grab grab essentially a HTML tag and then access any of the functions on that tag. So you could put a ref on something and say, click this. A lot of times I use a use ref to find, to autofocus on something, or to open something. So like if I'm coming from somewhere else, I'll put something in the URL, and then I'll have a use effect that watches the URL. So if it's like comment 45, and then the use ref, the use effect will see, oh, you've got the word comment and it's 45, and then it's like, okay, peel off the 45, and then the use ref will actually scroll me down to essentially where comment 45 is, and it will highlight it or whatever, or click the button or open something, because the ref will allow you to access any of the JSX properties. So on a button, it could be on click. You could actually force something to click, even though you haven't touched it. So you
Okay.
come from another page with the property in the URL. The use effect is watching for that property. It grabs it and then triggers like the ref to do something. So there's a whole bunch of functions that come inside of hooks. Let me see. But we generally just use the use effect and the use state and use ref. Those are the three most commonly. Memo is for when you get into performance.
Yeah, okay.
There's like a bunch more they've built since then. And I'm wondering, there's supposed to be in classes, they're putting in something called suspense. There's some cool things in classes where they lazy load the imports. So if you're not like, there's a way of actually like cutting down the bundle size and making things more efficient. So essentially when you land on the page, the things start to spin up, and suspense sort of is supposed to cover the spinner type thing. So when you're rendering, like there's a problem now where if you're rendering too many things and the page is got a lot of for loops and it's inefficient, it renders slow. Even though the data is returned, it could be like another second before the page actually renders because there's too much stuff on it.
Yeah.
And suspense would actually make the spinner go longer. So it would look like it's still loading.
Okay.
Because it doesn't allow anything to happen until the page is totally rendered. Which gives it a nice smoothness, because a lot of times the spinner stops and then the page is still blank.
Okay, you're getting way beyond me now. You're leaving me way in the dust now. I understand some of the concepts you're talking about, but
So let's just focus on use state, use effect. Those are the two big ones that you want to, that's why you want to understand that. The state is to trigger. User always does something to trigger everything. Use effect allows you to bypass, so that if the user goes to a new page and it loads, if the use effect is set with just that empty array brackets, it will automatically trigger to load some things. So the user still kind of triggered the effect. It's just, it was just by navigating instead of actually clicking a button on the page and triggering a state change. So there's stuff we want to do when the page loads, and then there's stuff we want to do after the page loads, based on changes on what happens with state.
Okay.
So the use effect and use state are good to learn. Not everything needs a use effect. Not everything needs a use state. But if you want change to show, you need a use state. And you can really, you actually, use effect won't work without a use state in, like, because there's no way to actually get anything outside of the use effect without having a state change inside the use effect. There's no way to actually get at it.
and for things like, I'm just trying to put a little bit of this into context. So imagine, you're coming into an application and the users put in their username somewhere, and the application's stored it in local storage. My name is Rick. Then the use state on load, is that like where you would reach into like local storage cookie or something and go, oh, this user's name is Rick, and then like start to initialize the application to get things started?
Yeah, I would put a use effect on loading the page that goes to local storage, gets that out, and then puts that in state. And then when you set state, you now have access to that variable outside the use effect. Now you could have just got it at the beginning, and then put it in, but then there's some confusion. Like one of the things about putting stuff inside use effects and use state is exactly which order everything's going to happen. When you leave an open variable, it gets evaluated every time there's a state change. So you can put open variables inside, like you can just declare a variable and then halfway down have an if statement, which I do a lot, but it means every time there's an evaluation, that's if statement and everything's going to get evaluated again. So on a page that's trivial, it doesn't matter. On a page that's not trivial, that extra if condition might cause some slowness. So you might want to do something different there. Like put it in a use effect and then have a state change happen. Because remember, every time there's a state change, so the way the DOM builds, it's a giant tree that's numbered. Every component, everything's numbered. And it simply goes down and checks, does a differential on everything. So if nothing has changed, it will not change anything. So leaving random things to chance usually causes more problems than trying to encapsulate them in things.
Yeah.
And I've tried to explain that to a number. Encapsulating things inside a use effect controls the state of what's happening to that. Because you know what's going to happen and you know when it's going to trigger. So like loading a selection dialog when you initialize with the component mounts, you could do that once inside a use effect, and then every state change after that. So if you make it a function where it loads up that stuff every time and then pass it to the selection box, it's going to do that every single state change. If you do it inside a use effect, and then you have it watching for and it's just on an it only happens once. It never gets done again. And so it's always loaded, and it never causes any drag on the page. React will let you do a lot of things that you shouldn't do.
Like any good language.
What's that?
Like any good language, right?
Yeah, but on a trivial page, it doesn't matter. It's when you get into the more complex pages and there's a lot of processing of data, building of data grids, a lot of elements, a lot of things going on. That's when you need the tight control on everything. That's when use effects become really powerful because it just happens when you want it to happen. So getting into the habit of writing things inside of use effects isn't bad. Like having a whole bunch of them on a page is actually better. Now, there's probably some trade-off where it's like, oh, you know, you have too many and it's evaluating all of them. And that causes an issue. I'm sure that's somewhere in there too, but.
Yeah, that's way beyond the people watching this recording, I would say. Yep.
Well, that's it. Most of the stuff you're going to do is going to be too trivial to notice any bad mistakes.
Yep.
So.
So I think my next step would be to watch the recording from last week, figure out how to put a route in there, and then play, see if there's some way I can take those two concepts and put them together for myself.
Yeah, and then we'll figure out something when I come back. We'll take next week off because, like, until I get this refactor done, I think my brain's going to be in the grinder.
All right.
And but I think what we should try and move to the. I don't know if I should post in advance and see what people want to do for the week, or if they want to have the React session, or what we want to cover, or take requests. I kind of like the way this is going, where it's a lot slower and we're just dealing with a small amount of concepts. I think people are going to have their own questions. We could get into writing something a little more complicated.
I think if there was a way, this is my personal view, if there's a way to like set up the basic thing and then say, okay, this is what we're going to build. It's going to look like this when we're done. And step one is we're going to add this button, and step two, we're going to add this input box, and step three, you know, and kind of like click, click, click. And then as you do things, we're wiring some state together. And then at the end, we've got, I don't know, whatever the thing is, but you know, you have one input box, you type hello and press enter, and a pop-up comes up. I'm not sure what that would look like, but I think, you know, trying to figure out how you get from, you know.
Well, do you have a simple design we could build to?
No, none of them are simple, but I could think of something. Yep.
If you just had a simple design, we could try and figure out how to build that.
Maybe even it might be as simple as building the set of components which stack together to build the recipe card.
We could do that.
The meal card, I guess I should say. Same
We
thing.
could do that. Yeah.
Because there's pills in there, and there's images, and you know, there's some hover states and buttons. I mean, in the designs it looks like a simple component, but really it's a whole bunch of components with hovers and clicks and states and you know, dietary needs for, you know, and that's where the little pills show up in the text and overflow and those sort of things. Theoretically, it might be a whole session just building one of those cards.
Well, it'd probably take us a lot longer than that. I think what we would do is start with the outer. Start by seeing what people think we should start with as an outer design. Like, look at the React material stuff, and then try and figure out how we would, you know, go about doing that as a group.
Yeah, and then that's kind of, then it's the component, and all the state and loading and stuff can come layer on top of it afterwards.
Yeah.
Right? Yep.
Well, yeah, there's lots of approaches to the way you can do those things. So we could build subcomponents essentially outside of the main page.
Yep.
We could even make a little bit of a page. So we could do like an app bar and like a little side nav and like a little few other things just to make the page less white and more realistic. And we could actually build, yeah, so what we could do is we can fake out the data calls by building like an array of data that loads on an init and then actually loads the cards up as it's going through.
It's about the JSON to mimic the API request or something.
Yeah. Well, actually, use effects are great for mimicking loading data, because you can even put a timer in there And so you could have a use effect that loads on a NIT that has an array that sets state. And when you, because what we do is we set state. So when I mock out a component, I build a dummy array with the JSON objects inside it. And then I put it inside a use effect. And then what you can do is actually put timers in there to slow it down so it feels like it's a, you know, it's actually loading. And you can even mock out and fake the spinner if you had to. So you could do a whole bunch of different things with use effects that, like, lots of times if I'm building something new, I'll just take everything, and then as long as I know the shape of the data arriving, it really doesn't matter. I don't need an endpoint. If I know the shape of the data, I don't need an endpoint. You can build your whole front end without a back end. And the reality is, if you have a great back end team, they should just be able to wire up the services at the end, and it just works.
Famous last words.
Well, the
This
great part
presumes the
about-
back end hasn't already lived for 10 years and has 15 layers of technology on top of it.
well, if you know what a service should return.
Should and does are different things.
It's the saying
All
no.
we're asking for is just an object. That's all. But yeah, you can totally build a whole front end without. If you knew the shape, you could actually run ahead of the services team and build the whole thing. If you knew the shape of all the objects. So, any other questions or any other? We're trying to finish these things at a decent hour.
Mm,
Yeah, I think my brain's full tonight.
Yeah.
All right, well,
I think
Cool.
me being the one actually in there clicking the buttons was super helpful for me. I know it's hard for others to sometimes follow along, but that was really helpful. A few things cemented in my brain there tonight. Thank you.
yeah, it's I'm finding this to be better than me going 90 miles an hour on the keyboard. Because the other thing is I find having somebody else do it slows me down a lot. It's like, because there's only a few times I went off on in the wrong direction.